You are listening to HOA Storytime Central. She wanted control, not the truth. I do not care what you think you heard. That was the first thing Krista Harlow said to me, and she said it loud enough that the entire mailbox cluster could hear. She was the vice president of the Maple Ridge Community Association in Reno, Nevada, and she was standing 3 feet from my face, waving a laminated guideline sheet without letting me read it. I had just come back from checking my porch and reporting a missing package to management, and somehow that had turned into a personal insult. She was already yelling about my doorbell camera being pointed wrong and calling it a violation too. I work as a security technician, so I know exactly where my camera is pointed and what it records. It covers my porch and about 2 feet of the walkway. That is it. I told her that. She did not care. She said a clerk at the management office confirmed her story, and the camera angle was in violation of community privacy standards. I asked which clerk. She ignored me and started reading selected lines from the laminated sheet out loud, her voice dripping with that rehearsed authority people use when they have memorized exactly one policy document. The missing package had contained nothing valuable, just some replacement parts for a job I was doing. I filed the report with management because that is what you are supposed to do. 30 minutes later, Krista showed up at my door with a printed packet and accused me of tampering with the camera to cover up a theft. She said someone had reported seeing my visitors stealing and that my guest parking privileges were now under review. She threatened a surprise inspection of my garage and porch storage. I asked her what theft. She said a roll of parking decals had gone missing from the clubhouse, and the timeline matched my package report exactly. That was when I realized she was setting me up. The accusation was absurd, but she had the paperwork, the tone, and the roll to make it stick. She said if I did not comply with the inspection within 24 hours, the HOA would start daily fines and suspend my parking access. I asked to see the evidence. She pointed at my camera lens and said that was the evidence, because the angle proved I was hiding something. It made no sense, but she was already walking away, shouting over her shoulder that the deadline was tomorrow at 6 in the evening and that non-compliance meant automatic escalation. I called management that night. The clerk I spoke to, a guy named Derek, said he had never confirmed anything about my camera. He said Krista had come in earlier that day asking about the missing decals and demanding to see the access log for the clubhouse supply closet. He showed her the log, and she left. That was it. No mention of my camera. No privacy complaint. Nothing. I asked if the log showed who took the decals. He said the log only tracked key fob entries, and the closet door had been left propped open during an event set up the week before, so anyone could have walked in. That was the first clue. The closet had been unsecured. Krista knew that, but she was pretending the theft required fob access so she could narrow the suspect list and pointed at me. I asked Derek if he could print the log for me. He said he would, but it would take a day or two because the system was slow. I thanked him and hung up. Then I checked my doorbell footage. The camera had been running continuously for 3 weeks, and I had cloud backups. I scrolled through the timeline for the day the decals went missing. Nothing unusual. No one approached my porch except the mail carrier and a delivery driver. I saved the clips and started building a file. The next morning, Krista was waiting at the mailbox cluster when I left for work. She cornered me in front of 4 neighbors and accused me loudly of tampering with evidence and violating the inspection deadline. I told her the deadline was at 6 in the evening and it was currently 7 in the morning. She said the deadline was 24 hours from notification, which meant it had already passed because she had left the notice at my door the previous afternoon. I pointed out that she had verbally told me 6 in the evening. She said verbal notifications did not count and that I should have read the written notice. If you are enjoying this chaos, hit that like button and subscribe so you do not miss what happens when the evidence starts piling up. I asked to see the written notice. She refused and said it was my responsibility to check my door. Then she said the new deadline was in 2 hours because I had missed the original one and the escalation policy required immediate compliance. She pulled out her phone and said she was calling the tow company to have my car removed from guest parking. I told her my car was in my assigned spot, not guest parking. She said my assigned spot was under review and no longer valid. She made the call right there, on speaker, while the neighbors watched. The tow dispatcher asked for the vehicle location and plate number. Krista rattled off my plate and said the car was illegally parked in a suspended spot. The dispatcher asked if she had a signed authorization form from management. Krista said she did not need one because she was the vice president. The dispatcher said company policy required written authorization for association tows and hung up. Krista's face went red. She turned to the neighbors and said I was the reason the community had to deal with theft and that anyone defending me was complicit. One of the neighbors, an older man named Gene, asked what I had supposedly stolen. Krista said she could not discuss an active investigation. Gene laughed and walked away. That made her angrier. She posted a community warning on the association portal that afternoon. It did not name me directly, but it said a resident was under investigation for tampering with security equipment and theft of HOA property, and that anyone with information should report it immediately. Then she showed up at my door and read the warning out loud to me, standing on my porch while recording herself on her phone. She said the board was considering a hearing and that my non-cooperation was being documented. I asked again to see the written notice she claimed to have left. She said she did not have it with her and that I should contact management if I had questions. I went to the management office the next morning. Derek handed me the gate fob log printout. It was a simple spreadsheet with timestamps and fob IDs, no names. I asked if he could cross-reference the IDs to resident accounts. He said he could, but it would take a formal request and board approval. I asked if Krista had requested the same thing. He said she had, and he had given her the same answer, but she had insisted she did not need approval because she was conducting an investigation. He showed me the email thread. Krista had demanded access to the full resident database so she could match the fob IDs herself. Derek had refused. She sent 3 follow-up emails in one day, each one more aggressive than the last. That was the second clue. Krista was desperate to control the narrative and the evidence. If she could not get the resident names tied to the fob log, she could not definitively exclude herself or pin it on someone else. I asked Derek if the log showed any entries for the time window when the decals went missing. He pointed to 4 entries within a 3-hour span on the day of the event setup. 3 were staff fobs. 1 was a board member fob. I asked which board member. He hesitated, then said it was Krista. I asked if I could get a copy of that specific page with her entry highlighted. He said he could not do that without a formal records request and a 10-day waiting period. I thanked him and left. On my way out, I ran into a woman named Sharon, a community volunteer who helped with clubhouse events. She asked if I was dealing with the decal situation. I said I was. She said the whole thing was a mess because the cashbox process during the event setup had been sloppy, and when she tried to mention it to Krista, Krista shut her down and said volunteers were not allowed to question board procedures. Sharon said she had seen Krista near the supply closet that day, but she did not think anything of it at the time because Krista was always in and out of the clubhouse. I asked if she would be willing to say that on the record. She said she would, but only if someone else backed her up because she did not want to deal with retaliation. I told her I would keep her name out of it for now. She gave me her number and said to call if I needed anything. That afternoon, Krista tried to force security to remove my mail carrier from the property. My mail carrier, a woman named Denise, had been delivering to Maple Ridge for 6 years. She knew everyone. Krista showed up at the mailbox cluster while Denise was sorting and accused her of trespassing because she had parked in a fire lane. Denise pointed out that mail carriers are allowed to park in fire lanes during delivery. Krista said not on private HOA property and demanded Denise leave immediately. Denise ignored her and kept working. Krista called the non-emergency police line and said there was an unauthorized vehicle blocking emergency access. A deputy showed up 20 minutes later. He talked to Denise first, then walked over to Krista. I was standing nearby, watching. The deputy asked Krista if she had proof that the mail carrier was violating HOA policy. Krista said the fire lane restriction was in the community guidelines. The deputy asked if mail carriers were exempt. Krista said no. The deputy said federal law overrides HOA policy for mail delivery and that calling 911 for a mail truck was a waste of resources. He told her to stop yelling and walked back to his car. Krista stood there fuming. Denise finished her route, then came over to me and asked what was going on. I explained the situation. She said Krista had been acting weird for weeks, hovering near the mailboxes and asking questions about package deliveries. Denise said she had seen Krista going through the outgoing mail slot a few times, which was against postal regulations. She offered to file a report if I needed it. I said I might. She gave me her work email and told me to reach out. That was my first real ally. The HOA gave me a formal cure deadline that night. The letter said I had until midnight to provide proof that I had not tampered with my camera or removed HOA property, or they would begin daily fines of $50 starting the next morning. The letter also said my guest parking privileges were suspended pending resolution. I called management and asked who signed the letter. Derek said it was signed by Krista on behalf of the board, but the board had not actually voted on it. He said she had sent it out unilaterally, which was technically allowed under emergency enforcement provisions, but those provisions required a board ratification vote within 5 days. I asked when the vote was scheduled. He said it was not. I asked if that meant the suspension was invalid. He said technically yes, but Krista was already telling residents it was in effect, and security had been instructed to enforce it. I asked if I could park in guest spaces until the board vote. He said he did not know and suggested I talk to a lawyer. I did not have time for a lawyer. My car was essential because I had a medical appointment scheduled in 2 days, and the appointment was an hour away in a neighboring town. If Krista got my car towed, I would miss it. I started gathering everything I had: doorbell footage, the fob log printout, Denise's contact info, Sharon's statement, the email thread Derek had shown me, and screenshots of Krista's community warning post. I also pulled the metadata from my doorbell camera files to prove the recordings had not been edited. Then, I went back through my own records and found something strange. The day the decals went missing, I had been at a job site 2 hours away. I had GPS timestamps from my work van and a signed invoice from the client. There was no way I could have been at the clubhouse. That was the third clue. I had an alibi, and it was ironclad. I printed everything and put it in a binder. Then I called Denise and asked if she would be willing to give a recorded statement. She said yes. I met her at a coffee shop the next morning and recorded her on my phone. She confirmed that she had seen Krista near the mailboxes multiple times, acting suspiciously, and that she had witnessed Krista going through the outgoing mail slot at least twice. She also said Krista had asked her once if she ever noticed residents taking mail that did not belong to them. Denise thought it was a strange question at the time, but now it made sense. I also called Sharon and asked if she remembered anything else about the event setup. She said Krista had been alone in the supply closet for about 10 minutes at one point, and when Sharon walked by, Krista came out holding a cardboard box and told her to stop hovering. Sharon said she did not see what was in the box, but it looked like it had supplies in it. I asked if she could describe the box. She said it was a standard office supply box, white with blue printing, medium size. I thanked her and added her statement to the binder. The next morning, Krista showed up exactly when I was leaving for work. She blocked my car with her SUV and got out holding a clipboard and a key ring. She said the board had authorized a vehicle inspection because my car had been reported for leaking fluids, and she needed to verify the VIN and registration. I told her I had never received a notice about a vehicle inspection. She said the notice had been posted on the community portal. I checked the portal on my phone. There was no notice. I showed her the screen. She said I must not be looking in the right section and that my failure to comply was being documented. She walked around my car taking pictures with her phone, then tried to open the door. It was locked. She demanded I unlock it. I refused. She said obstructing an HOA inspection was a violation and would result in immediate towing. I told her she did not have the authority to inspect my car without a court order or my consent. She said the CC&Rs gave the board broad inspection powers. I asked her to show me the specific clause. She ignored me and called the tow company again. This time, a different dispatcher answered. Krista said she needed an immediate tow for an unregistered vehicle in violation of community standards. The dispatcher asked for proof of the violation. Krista said she had photographic evidence. The dispatcher asked if the vehicle had expired tags. Krista said no, but it was parked in a suspended spot. The dispatcher asked if she had written authorization from management. Krista said she was the authorization. The dispatcher said they could not proceed without a signed form and hung up. Krista screamed into her phone and then turned to me. She said if I did not move my car immediately, she would have it towed by a different company. I told her I was leaving for work and she needed to move her SUV. She refused. I called the non-emergency police line and said my neighbor was blocking my driveway and refusing to move. The dispatcher said they would send someone. Krista heard me and got back in her SUV, then pulled forward just enough that I could back out. As I was leaving, she yelled that the board was meeting in 2 days and that I was being added to the agenda for a formal hearing. I drove to work, but I could not focus. The harassment was escalating, and I was running out of time. That night, I got an email from Derek. He said the board vote on my parking suspension had been scheduled for the following week, but Krista was already enforcing it as if it had passed. He also said Krista had filed a formal complaint against him for releasing the foblog to me without board approval. He was being investigated internally, and his supervisor had told him to stop communicating with residents about ongoing enforcement matters. He apologized and said he could not help me anymore. I was on my own. I went through the binder again and realized I had enough to prove I did not steal the decals, but I still did not have proof that Krista did. I needed something concrete. I called Sharon and asked if she remembered the name of the vendor who supplied the event materials. She said it was a local print shop called Valley Graphics. I looked them up and called the next morning. I explained the situation and asked if they had a record of the decal order. The guy who answered said he remembered the order because it had been rush printed and Krista had insisted on picking it up herself instead of having it delivered. He said, "She paid in cash." I asked if he had a receipt. He said he did, but it was a handwritten carbon copy because their POS system had been down that day. I asked if I could get a copy. He said he would have to check with his manager. I gave him my number and waited. 2 hours later, he called back and said the manager approved it. I drove over and picked up the receipt. It showed Krista had ordered 200 parking decals and paid $240 in cash. The date was 3 days before the decals went missing. That was the twist. Krista had not stolen the decals from the clubhouse. She had ordered them herself, paid cash so there would be no paper trail, and then reported them stolen to frame someone else. The missing decals were probably in her garage or her car. I added the receipt to the binder and started planning my next move. The board meeting was in 2 days, and I needed to confront her before then. I reached out to a tow company directly, the same one Krista had been calling. I explained that I was a resident dealing with a board member who kept making false tow requests, and I wanted to know what their policy was. The dispatcher I spoke to, a woman named Lisa, said they had flagged Krista's account after the second call because she kept demanding tows without proper authorization. She said if Krista called again, they would require written proof from management before dispatching a truck. I asked if Lisa would be willing to document that in an email. She said she could not do that, but if Krista called again and I was present, I could record the interaction. That gave me an idea. I started parking in guest spaces instead of my assigned spot. It was technically allowed because my assigned spot suspension had never been ratified by the board. Krista noticed immediately. The next morning, she was waiting in the parking lot when I pulled in. She demanded I move my car. I refused. She called the tow company right there, on speaker, while I recorded on my phone. Lisa answered. Krista said she needed an emergency tow for an illegally parked vehicle in guest parking. Lisa asked for the authorization form. Krista said she did not have one yet, but she was the vice president and the vehicle was in violation. Lisa said the company could not proceed without written authorization and suggested Krista contact management to get the form signed. Krista hung up and turned to me. She said I was going to regret this. She posted another community warning that afternoon. This one accused me by implication of harassment and intimidation, claiming a resident was using guest parking to circumvent enforcement and that the behavior was under board review. She also updated the portal to say my parking suspension was active and that any vehicles associated with my unit would be towed on site. I screenshot everything and added it to the binder. The board meeting was scheduled for 6 in the evening at the clubhouse. I showed up early with my binder and my phone. Krista was already there, setting up a projector and arranging papers on a table. She saw me and told me to leave because the meeting was board only. I said the agenda listed a resident hearing, and I was the resident. She said the hearing had been moved to executive session and I was not allowed to attend. I asked when I would be notified of the new time. She said I would receive an email after the board made a decision. I told her that was not how hearings worked and that I had a right to present evidence. She ignored me and went back to her setup. Other board members started arriving. I recognized 2 of them from community events. I approached one, a guy named Tom, and explained the situation. I showed him the binder and the receipt from Valley Graphics. He looked at the receipt, then at Krista, then back at me. He asked if I had proof she ordered the decals herself. I said the receipt was the proof. He said he would bring it up during the meeting. Krista overheard and walked over. She said the receipt was irrelevant because the decals in question were HOA property, not personal purchases. I pointed out that the receipt predated the theft report. she said the timeline did not matter because I had tampered with my camera to create a false alibi. That was when I pulled out my phone and played the recording of Denise. Her voice filled the room. She described seeing Krista near the mailboxes, going through the outgoing mail slot, and acting suspiciously around package deliveries. Krista went pale. She tried to grab my phone. I stepped back. Tom told her to stop. She said the recording was illegal because Denise had not consented. I said Nevada is a one-party consent state and I was the one party. Tom asked if there was more. I played Sharon's statement next. Sharon described Krista being alone in the supply closet with a cardboard box and shutting her down when she asked questions. Krista said both statements were hearsay and inadmissible. Tom said this was not a court and the board could consider any evidence. Krista said the meeting was not officially started and nothing being said counted. Tom looked at the other board members. One of them, a woman named Linda, said they should postpone the hearing until they could review everything. Krista said there was nothing to review because I was clearly lying. Linda said Krista was too personally involved and should recuse herself. Krista refused. Linda said if she did not recuse, Linda would call for a vote to remove her from the hearing. Krista said that was not allowed under board procedures. Linda pulled out her phone and read the bylaw out loud. It explicitly allowed recusal votes in cases of personal conflict. Krista realized she was losing control. She grabbed her papers and said the meeting was invalid because a quorum had not been established. Tom counted the board members in the room. There were 4, which was quorum. Krista said one of them was not officially seated yet because the election certification was still pending. Tom said the certification had been finalized 2 weeks ago and Krista had signed off on it herself. Krista said she did not remember that. Linda pulled up the email thread on her phone and showed it to everyone. Krista's signature was right there. The meeting fell apart. Krista stormed out, taking her projector and papers with her. Tom said they would reschedule the hearing and notify me officially. I thanked him and left. On my way out, I saw Krista sitting in her SUV in the parking lot, talking on her phone. She saw me and rolled down her window. She said this was not over and that I had just made everything worse for myself. I did not respond. I went home and waited. 2 days later, I got a call from Lisa at the tow company. She said Krista had called again, this time claiming my car was abandoned in guest parking and needed immediate removal. Lisa said she told Krista the same thing as before, written authorization required. Krista had insisted she did not need authorization and that the tow company was obstructing HOA enforcement. Lisa said she terminated the call and flagged Krista's account as abusive. Then, Lisa said something that changed everything. She said another driver at the company had mentioned that Krista tried to hire them a few weeks ago to tow a car from the clubhouse lot, but when the driver arrived, there was no car, and Krista tried to redirect him to a different address. The driver refused and left. Lisa said it sounded like Krista was using tow threats to harass people. I asked if the driver would be willing to document that. Lisa said she would ask. An hour later, she called back and said the driver, a guy named Mike, would send a written statement if I needed it. I said I did. He emailed it that afternoon. The statement described Krista calling in a fake tow, giving a false vehicle description, and then trying to change the address mid-dispatch. Mike had noted the incident in the company log because it violated their service agreement. That was the final piece. I added Mike's statement to the binder and requested a formal records review with management. Derek's replacement, a woman named Claire, scheduled a meeting for the next day. I brought the binder and walked her through everything: the fob log, the receipt, the recordings, the tow company statements, the vendor pressure, the false notices, and the timeline. Claire listened, took notes, and said she would forward everything to the board president and the HOA attorney. She also said the parking suspension was being lifted immediately because it had never been properly voted on, and any fines assessed during the suspension would be refunded. The board president, a man named Richard, called me that evening. He apologized for the situation and said the board was opening an internal investigation into Krista's conduct. He also said the HOA attorney had reviewed my evidence and determined that Krista had exceeded her authority multiple times. Richard said Krista was being placed on administrative leave from her vice president role pending the outcome of the investigation. He asked if I wanted to pursue formal legal action. I said I wanted a written retraction of all accusations, a full refund of any fees or fines, and a guarantee that Krista would not be involved in any future enforcement actions related to my unit. Richard said he would make that happen. The retraction was posted on the community portal 2 days later. It stated that the allegations against me were unfounded, that the investigation had been closed, and that the HOA regretted any inconvenience. It did not name Krista, but everyone knew. The refund of fees hit my account the next week, showing up on the ledger like a slap. Krista stopped showing up at the mailbox cluster. Neighbors started asking me what happened. I kept it vague, but word spread. The final humiliation came a week later. I was in the parking lot loading groceries into my car when a tow truck pulled in. Krista was standing near the clubhouse entrance, waving at the driver and pointing at a car in guest parking. The driver got out and walked over to her. I could hear them from where I was standing. Krista said the car was illegally parked and needed to be towed immediately. The tow driver refused Karen's order and asked her for paperwork on speaker. She said she did not have paperwork because she was the vice president and her word was sufficient. The driver said his company required written authorization for all association tows, no exceptions. Krista raised her voice. The driver got back in his truck and started to leave. Krista stepped in front of the truck. The driver stopped, leaned out the window, and told her to move or he would call the police. She did not move. He called the police. A deputy arrived 10 minutes later. He talked to the driver first, then to Krista. Krista kept talking, explaining her authority and the violation and the need for immediate action. The deputy wrote it all down. Then, he asked if she had any proof that the car was illegally parked. She pointed at the guest parking sign and said the car had been there for more than 48 hours. The deputy asked if she had documented that. She said she did not need to document it because she saw it herself. The deputy asked if the car had expired tags or any visible violations. She said no, but the HOA rules clearly stated a 48-hour limit. The deputy said HOA parking rules were a civil matter and he could not enforce them. Krista demanded he write a report anyway. The deputy said he would, and he did. He wrote down everything she said, including her attempt to block the tow truck. Then, he told her to stop yelling, and left. Neighbors had gathered by then. Some were filming. Krista saw them and tried to leave, but her SUV was blocked by the tow truck. The driver refused to move until she apologized for stepping in front of his vehicle. She refused. They stood there for 5 minutes in a stalemate. Finally, another board member, Linda, came out and told Krista to get in her car and go home. Krista left. The tow driver moved his truck. The neighbors dispersed. The investigation concluded a month later. The board found that Krista had misused her position, made false accusations, exceeded her enforcement authority, and attempted to intimidate residents and vendors. She was removed from the board and banned from holding any HOA leadership position for 5 years. The HOA also revised its enforcement procedures to require board votes for all parking suspensions and tow authorizations. Management was disciplined for allowing the frame-up to proceed without proper oversight, and the staff process that enabled the sloppy cash box handling during event setups was tightened. Krista's attempt to intimidate a neighbor backfired when the neighbor, Jean, filed a formal complaint describing her mailbox ambush and her community warning posts. The complaint triggered a separate review, and Krista was fined for violating the community conduct policy. A refund of fees that hit the ledger like a slap became a running joke among residents who knew what happened. Denise still delivers mail to Maple Ridge. She waves every time she sees me. Sharon volunteers at clubhouse events again, and she makes sure the supply closet is always locked. Mike from the tow company told me his dispatcher laughs every time someone mentions Maple Ridge because of how many times Krista called with fake requests. I still have the binder. I keep it in my car just in case. The doorbell camera is still pointed at my porch, recording everything, exactly where it is supposed to be. Your camera does not matter. My minutes are the truth. That is what Krista said to me once, waving her laminated sheet like it was a court order. Turns out, cameras matter a lot when the minutes are full of lies, and the truth is sitting in a binder with receipts, recordings, and witness statements that no amount of yelling can erase. I hope your fines stay at 0.